Hello, welcome to weeks 7 and 9, procedural variations in functional analysis. This week is week 7, an online course. Next week is spring break, so there are no classes. And then the following week, week 9, that starts March 23rd, is also online. So we are going to cover both of the online courses today and present all of the readings. I've also included, as you can see, a picture of myself. Some people have suggested that adding the picture makes this feel more personal to you and make you feel more involved. Personally, I fear that it's just creepy, but let me know and we'll respond accordingly for future classes. Last week, we talked about what I would consider traditional functional analysis, and that is, of course, functional analysis involves both direct observation and systematic manipulation of antecedent and consequent events. Therefore, it really is an experimental functional assessment. Last week, we looked at generally social positive functions, social negative functions, automatic functions, and the discriminative stimuli that signal the availability of reinforcement and motivating operations that establish the value of reinforcing consequences. All of that are the essential elements of a functional analysis. Now, we've been talking about traditional functional analysis last week, which to me means several things. One is it's analog, which means the individuals are taken to a separate area because it is an experiment, and experimental conditions are implemented. Those antecedent and consequent conditions that I just described are implemented. Also, you may have noticed that most of the traditional functional analysis sessions, there's a lot of them, somewhere between 40 and 60 sessions typically, before you start to see those patterns that we discussed last week that allow you to determine the variables that are maintaining the behavior and therefore allow you to come up with an appropriate treatment based on the results of the assessment. Additionally, the traditional functional analysis contain all four of the basic AWADA conditions, that is, a control condition, a variation of a demand condition, an attention condition, and an alone condition. Finally, all of the traditional functional analysis focuses on the target behavior, which often is a dangerous behavior, severe aggression, or self-injurious behavior. And it's because of all of these reasons that you will hear, or a lot of people say, that they can't do a functional analysis. They realize a functional analysis might be useful to coming up with an effective intervention, but they can't do a functional analysis where they work because it's either too dangerous, manipulating severe aggression or self-injurious behavior, too time-consuming, and or too complicated. However, contemporary behavior analysts have attempted to address those issues, and my purpose today, with the readings today and the readings for week 9, are to convince you that you can do, and maybe you're already doing it and just don't know it, functional analyses in your current work sites. So So the articles you're going to read are going to focus on some procedural variations that I want to highlight. One is several of them talk about doing functional analyses that are naturalistic as opposed to analog. That is, they are in the environment where the behavior is occurring. So the PACE study is an example of that. The Stromer study is an example of that. All of these procedural variations use brief functional analyses, so not doing 40 to 60 sessions. Northrop was the first first study that, and I think, really probably other than the Iwata original functional analysis study, is probably the most important study in functional analysis that really demonstrated that these could be done on an outpatient basis in an outpatient clinic, and they could be brief. Then the investigation of fewer variables. Stromer's article just looks at two variables, a control condition and a variation of interesting variation of an attention condition. That is very contemporary now, looking at just two variables rather than having four conditions or more conditions. Also, some of the examples you're going to see are things called trial-based, which are very cool. Stromer is an example of trial-based also, and in that Niedert chapter that you're going to read. But trial-based means you work the functional analysis into the actual conditions that are going on. So this lends itself to doing functional analyses in a classroom where, depending on what the structure of that particular class is or that particular aspect of the class, that you could work in an attention condition or a demand condition and do a functional analysis very naturally, really without anyone even knowing that you're doing a functional analysis. Not that you have to hide it and it's anything bad, but it doesn't make one look like they're doing an experiment. Rather, they're just doing an analysis. And then finally, the manipulation of target behaviors. And what I mean by that is, this is the graph from the PACE study you're going to read. And I want you to just focus on, the reason I included it is that this individual engaged in very, very severe aggression. And of course, as you can see from my picture, that's not a problem for me. But seriously, the problem was this individual sustained a brain injury. He was in a great program with other individuals who were brain injured. The problem was his aggression was so severe that he had hurt several staff. Additionally, he also engaged in very, very severe property destruction, and he was ripping the place apart. And he was very close to being thrown out of this great placement. So we couldn't afford to have the target behaviors occur. So this is an example of where we were able to identify, in many cases you can do this if you look at it closely, a precursor to the dangerous behavior, to the aggression and to the property destruction. And in his case, that happened to be obscenities. So the chain of behaviors, if you were he would start with these obscenities. If he didn't get his way, then they might develop into property destruction and then even physical aggression. So we had to do a functional analysis, but never really allow it to get beyond the obscenities, which were nasty, but we could handle those, and the staff could handle those, as opposed to the physical aggression and the property destruction. Darn it. So, sorry. So you could see that the target behaviors, these little circles, had to be zeros for the most part, because we could not afford them the obscenities to escalate, because if that didn't work, the next step was the physical aggression and or the property destruction. So that's an example of a contemporary functional analysis that's, one, done in a naturalistic setting, and two, that you're modifying the target behavior, so you're not dealing with the most dangerous kind of behavior. This is from the Stromer study, and this is really a good example of what a contemporary functional analysis could be. Now, this was done in a classroom, so it's also naturalistic, short sessions. That is the functional analysis. There it is, 4 sessions. I believe these were 5-minute sessions. So there's 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes of data here. Well, no, actually 40 minutes. So I believe this functional analysis was collected in less than a week, and then the treatment added another week or 2, and the whole study was done in 2 weeks. And the most significant part about this is that without this functional assessment, several other, this was a brief study, so they didn't get into a lot of this detail, but a lot of other more informal interventions based upon direct and indirect assessments attempted to come up with interventions. None of them were successful. So we really needed to do this kind of functional analysis to really figure out what the salient variables were. And then once we identified them, as they were identified quickly here, then we were able to come up with an intervention that was really effective. But I mean, look at this. This could have been done in 1 day. I think it took 3 days to do this particular functional analysis. So Andy, if you're feeling guilty right now for not doing functional analyses after seeing how easy, short, simple they can be, well, that's the purpose of me presenting these articles and having you read these. So I feel good about that. All right, so this week I want you to read the Northrop article, the Pace article, and the Stromer article. Next week, that'll be week 8, is spring break, as I said, and there is no class. Then the following week, which is week 9, that starts Monday, March 23rd, is another online class. And that week will continue with variations in functional analysis. So for week 9, you're going to read the Neidert chapter, which represents a nice summary of functional analysis, discusses trial-based functional analysis, which I mentioned, which I really think is a very cool thing that a lot of you could incorporate. Those of you who work in schools, those of you who work in group homes, you could really incorporate a functional analysis into naturally what's going on into the classroom. And Vollmer's article is what I consider a classic, again, in 1995. I'm surprised that it's not cited that much, although Neidert does cite it. And what it does is it sort of establishes a rubric, if you will, for moving from very brief and simple kinds of assessments to the traditional, if you will, AWADA functional analysis. And even though it's old in that it was published in 1995, I think it still is very, very relevant and an approach that I think a lot of us would benefit from attempting when trying to understand what the behavior is that's maintaining the target behavior. So the point of these is this is really more contemporary. This is the way most people do functional analyses today. And there's really not a good excuse to say they're too complicated, they're too time-consuming, they're too dangerous. My school, my group home won't let me do them, because you really can. And hopefully, after reading these articles over this 2 or 3 week period, you will have come to that conclusion also. So have fun, enjoy spring break, and I will talk to you. We will get back together in week 10, which will be Thursday, April 2nd, and we'll have presentations. Christine will be presenting Piazza, Debbie will be presenting the Fisher article, and Connor will present the Borello article. See you then.